All right, we're out here on the streets of Denver, about to blow some Clovis minds. It's a little hot out here, but I think we'll have some impact. Hopefully we get some open-minded people, not some complete sheep, but we'll see what happens.
It's going to be great whatever happens. We're going to wake up people about what's happening, or they can just look it up themselves, you know. It's all up to them what they want to do.
But let's hit it. Let's do it. Aware that we live on a flat motionless plane and not a spinning planet?
Good point.
Spinning planet.
Woo!
There it is. Check it out, guys. That is so exciting. Incredible.
I wanted to first say thank you to the seekers of truth and the givers of truth. We're all looking to penetrate this chasm of deep knowledge and get some kind of clarity as to what exactly is going on our planetary system, how we can make things better, and also how we can continue to develop our souls. And that is primary. So the more of us that are sharing the knowledge and information, bouncing it back and forth, and coming into more of a realization of what's going on, the better. So today's message, I do have some illustrations to show, and I'm just going to jump right into this in respect of time. And I really want to say first that the dimensions and the shape of Earth are what we determine it is. We have to be very clear about where we're exactly at and what's happening and what's happened over time. But there is an infinite vault, meaning an infinite amount of space above us. And there is also an infinite abyss or space below us. And what we're doing is we're actually filling that space. We fill that space with our energy, our concepts, even our constructs. And we often have to see that our expansion moves in all directions. So when someone says that they're ascending, in equal measure, they're also descending and they're also moving left and right. So ascension in itself is something that grows out into this direction because you're expanding. And that's something that's well understood about our spiritual vehicle. So the image that I'm showing you here is actually they're two rather ancient images from two spectrums of the cultures that are presiding here on Earth. And the reason why I'm showing this image is so that you can see that it's all encompassing the idea of where our origins are when we enter into physicality. And one picture, which you'll see is much more archaic, it's Sumerian picture of what we would say is Tiamat, also known as Leviathan, also known as Behemoth, also known as the mother of monsters. And that's because the birth of the entities that came forth from her were known to be chimeric, or actually containing more than one type of being or characteristic. And these now come out to us as the zodiac signs. It comes out to us as even gods or deities that sometimes request to be worshipped. It comes out to us as archons, but their origins were with the mother and our origins are with the mother. So that's an important thing to remember. You're also seeing a rather old statue of Gaelic tradition of the same kind of image of a mother that is clearly aquatic and from the ocean, and known as also the aquatic or mother goddess. And the reason why I find this so important to start from this standpoint is because if you don't know where you come from, then you don't know where you're going. That's how all plants and that's how all things grow. They must recall first where they came from, and then they know where they're going. The seed of anything always contains the whole. So there's absolutely no way we can begin to determine what the size, shape, and form of Earth may be without first having the knowledge of exactly where we came from. And as that knowledge continues, you'll see it pass across traditions. This is actually another elder tradition in Kemet. This is Mayat, and this is the actual emission of the planet, what's on the planet. So once again, you see what's being depicted is a womb and everything being encompassed inside of that womb. So the first thing that I would really like to bring forth for all of us to understand is that we are inside of something, and on top of something that is very much alive. We talk about it all the time, Mother Earth. We see trees grow out of it. We sustain ourselves from it, but often it skips our consciousness that this is actually alive and it is a living being. And in many cases, when you study the ancient traditions, which I've not only studied, but also been able to journey through my projections of the astral eye and also through my chakra centers, you'll begin to witness an archaic connection with this mother goddess, which is actually what we're on. Now, I would like to first introduce something that is often skipped within the presentations about the goddess. And we'll run this picture back one more time. And that's, we refer to it as a goddess because primarily it's feminine, but it does have a masculine component. Even men have a feminine component. We have a positive, a negative, and a neutral side to our body. And in physicality, we only appear as what we're partial to the most. So if you're partial to one pole, you'll come out as male. You're partial to another pole, you'll come out as female. And if you ever come in completely balanced, you'll actually come into the reality as a hermaphrodite, which we actually don't see that much anymore because there's a 23.5 degree tilt on the earth that actually governs why most people use their right hand opposed to their left. So what you see here is you see also this birthing taking place, because some may ask, well, how did this mother birth these children? And when you study this from an archaic level, even the Parthenon, you see that women, as we would call them, could become pregnant without the actual external male component. That's also referred to as parthenogenesis. You can look it up. It's mainly present within the reptilian species. And this is also why you see that the mother has the termination of reptilian legs, or which could be considered as scales or fish legs. And for anybody that's thinking about it, yes, this is also what's now come to us as the Starbucks symbol. Now, this image here is actually showing you across time how the image of the mother goddess has actually morphed through time from indigenous cultures. And if you notice the chart to the top left, you'll see that the symbol in itself is that of an anchor. That our modern anchor, and the shape of that anchor, is actually modeled after the goddess. And the reason is the mother goddess, or the mothership. And the reason is because this mothership is actually anchoring us in this vault or this abyss. And this is important to remember because for all beings in the physicality, you actually need something firm to stand on. You need roots in order to be able to grow up. So the mother goddess has always provided those roots, and we're still on that ship now. And that ship is organic and it is alive. You'll also notice to when you start seeing the topographical instance of the earth that, in a nutshell, that all the bodies, as we're calling them, because in archaic form, they are literally bodies. And it baffles our consciousness to how a body could be that large. But when you start moving up through the frequencies and you move out of the density of the physical reality, and then you cancel time, you actually can see the earth moving and breathing as a life form. And even when you go into different places, you'll also see the varying characteristics of these life forms. But just to take it as it is, the life forms are in themselves emerging from the deep or emerging from the water, and we're standing on top of those life forms. So before we can even go further, though, we have to dig a little bit deeper into our origins. And our origins are, in fact, from the ocean. And this is why you often see in occult terminology, there's a reference to the Holy See. There's a reference to Mary, which means the ocean, which comes out in Christianity and many traditions as the goddess. And then you also witness things like these images, which are George Haeckel's radiolaria. And in these images, what you begin to see is you begin to see not only the origins of life from its minute scale, but also to its magnitude, because the geometry is fractal. So this means that much of what, if not all of what has been introduced into this world today is actually been pulled from the ocean. And that comes in the state of our subconscious. It comes in the state of our inventions. It comes in the state of our occultism. It comes in the state of our symbolism. So it actually is embodied within everything that is presented to us in the world today. So while one may say there's nothing new under the sun, which is more of a male reference, as sun means male, there's actually the deep that one would need to research in order to get deeper into the knowledge about where we are and what's going on the planetary system. So as you can see here, when you begin to really study the albums of George Haeckel's work, you actually find entire shells that contain what we would call a heart, what we would call a spleen, and what we would call a liver, and the parts of the human body. But we're talking about a span of over millions of years of the process of the existence of this planetary system. So I wanted to let everyone know now, this is not an illusionary world. If it's an illusionary world to you, you would have to question how fake you are. This world is very real, and it also requires us to do some digging deep and also to use our extra senses in order to divine exactly what's happening here and what's gone on throughout the timeline. But this is a simple example of what you're seeing here is actually the helmets, or what appear to be the helmets of the Mongolians, but these are pulled from the sea. And it's just one example. I have several of them that I won't be able to show today, but one example of how our subconscious mind will pull a shape or an image of something from a primordial time and then come out with that as if we've invented it, or we use it as if it's something that we need to have as a part of our embodiment and a part of our protection.
So there are two ways to map out an area. You can use a square grid or a circular polar type grid. Now, no one, as I stated in my previous video, no one ever said I'm going to survey my property, my state, my country, my continent in the form of a globe so I know where everything is. Everything is laid out on a flat plane so that you know where everything's at. Because on a square grid, wherever the lines intersect, and you can create as many divisible lines as you need, wherever the lines intersect it would be a point on the map of land or a point of interest. And the same thing for the circular or polar version. So if you were to just put that over the grid, either one, wherever the lines intersect would be a point you would mark on the map. So if there's a point right here, let's just draw something. Let's just draw that right there. So regardless of which map or mapping you do, as long as you kept that map in that form and your center point was the same, you would know based on the center point of where you're at, the location based on degrees or intersecting lines, where that point is. So if you transfer that into a small version or replicated it, you would always know based on the center point of where that center point is, where everything else is at. The problem lies in that once you created the map in that form, if you change either one, it would distort the relative size and location of that point. So if you took the square and converted that into a polar region, it would distort it. And the same for the polar region. If you took the original polar region and converted it into the square type map, it would distort it. So once it's created, it has to stay in that format if that's what you're using. So the whole idea of projections makes no sense because every projection will distort something. So we have to understand that the only way to map it is on either a square or a circular map. The question is why a circular map was used and is still being used today. And that's very interesting because, well, it's not, sadly, I was going to say sadly, but unfortunately, we are not taught the reasons for that. Why there's a circle, and more specifically, why there's 360 degrees of a circle. Why every circle is always considered to have 360 degrees. You could have whatever you wanted. You could divide that into 800, 700, 1,000 degrees. Why is it 360 degrees?
A little hot out here, but I think we'll have some impact. Hopefully we get some open-minded people, not some complete sheep, but we'll see what happens.
It's going to be great whatever happens. We're going to wake up people about what's happening, or they can just look it up themselves, you know. It's all up to them what they want to do.
But let's hit it. Let's do it. Aware that we live on a flat motionless plane and not a spinning planet?
Good point.
Woo! Have you heard of this theory?
Yes.
And what do you think about it?
Well, my hair is round like the Earth.
Yes?
Maybe not. Maybe so. It's the Froller system.
It's the Froller system.
Yes. Everybody's picking on me.
Oh,
It's actually a globe round.
Nope.
No, it's flat.
Research it, man.
Go to Google right now.
You can't walk off the edge.
We never said you could walk off the edge,
What
but
happens at the edge?
we don't know.
Show you 10 reasons
Why is NASA faking their footage show? They are. We can show you exactly how they're faking their footage with CGI techniques, green screen.
Here's also two maps that have been redone but come from much more ancient maps of what the world looked like before the continents began to divide. But the main characteristic that I want you to notice here is that everything is coming out of the water and surrounded by the water. So in the flat earth theory of the ice wall is actually an endless expanse of water that we're actually emerging from. And also to quell the conflicts that go on about space, the ocean to the indigenous was known to be space. The space is actually a reflection of what's in the ocean and what's on top of the emerging bodies of water coming out of the ocean. The only thing that you're seeing in the sky as far as those lights is you're seeing the spirits of the individuals that are still in the ocean or on land. And that's why in most occult knowledge, they say that there's a star in the sky that actually belongs to you. That is true. And many of the larger celestial bodies, the ones that we can see and we can recall as planets, are actually still in our ocean, and you're seeing the reflection of their spirit, which you could call bioluminescence. In addition to that, to also quell somewhat of the debates about if it's flat or not, we have to understand that even the top flat earth theorists did not actually use the term flat as a meaning of it actually being flat. That was just more of a catchphrase that kind of caught on for someone that was kind of discriminating against the whole theory that the earth was actually alive and actually a womb and a plane that we were walking on. Because in every sense, it's actually not flat. You can see many mountainous regions and valleys and also structures that embed themselves so deep into the mantle of these bodies that it would be kind of logical that you could eventually circumference the entire thing, but it would not be an orb. And I think that that's what the biggest arguments are about, is that Earth is not a sphere, which it is not. It is more of a craterous bowl-like chasm.
right, so we're out here on the streets of Denver in front of the belly of the beast, the good old Federal Reserve, robbing the goddamn blind. But anyway, we're out here on the streets telling people that NASA shows them cartoons and tells them it's real. They've never seen a real picture from space, ever. All ISS footage is fake. Everything is fake. We live on a flat, motionless plane, and you've all been deceived. Satellites aren't real. None of them. Sounds crazy, but 99% of your internet comes from undersea, transatlantic, and trans-Pacific cables. Name one experiment to prove one globe.
An experiment?
An experiment? A video? A picture? Something?
I believe Aristotle did an experiment where he measured...
Aristophanes.
Well, first of all, that's thousands of years ago. Today, it's 2017.
Well, you should be able to do the experiment again. Came up with the same result.
But
yeah, so his experiment was the stick experiment where he like put them in the ground in like very distant locations and then he measures the shadow angle.
Yeah.
However, if you bring the sun closer in, you get the same effect.
So let's see what the Ministry of Truth website has to say about why a circle has 360 degrees. The original, well, let's highlight this here so you can know what I'm talking about. The original motivation for choosing the degree as a unit of rotations and angles is unknown. One theory states that it is related to the fact that 360 is approximate number of days in a year. Ancient astronomers noticed that the sun, which follows the ecliptic path over the course of the year, seems to advance in its path by approximately 1 degree each day. Some ancient calendars, such as the Persian calendar, use 360 days for a year. The use of a calendar with 360 days may be related to the use of sexagesimal numbers. Ooh, butchered that one. The answer is all right there. Now you have to understand that a good lie always has truth mixed in. And that is exactly what happened with the circle, with this topic right here. So what happened is the ancients, whoever they were, realized that the sun took approximately 360 days to return to its original location because the sun is always moving. So what I did is I took the timeanddate.com snapshot for 1 day on the first of the month for 12 months. So this is a series of 12 images. So the sun, here's GMT line right here. Okay, so GMT midnight. So it's midnight in England, and it's noontime on the other side. So watch as every month, if I go back, or now the sun is actually starting to watch as it goes. This is April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. And then it goes right back to. Now watch it in motion. Notice the figure 8. So the ancients found out that the sun's gyrations always return back to its original position every 360 days. Roughly. We know now it's more like 365 if you average it out, but for them it was figured 360 days. That's how we wound up with 360 degrees. Now, if it was wrong, would they still be using that? Of course not. Because that is why the Earth is always mapped in a circle. Because the sun going around the circle is what dictates the map. That's why it's a circle. That's why we don't use a square. It's because the sun, and I'm going to show you this in a little bit here too, the sun rotating around the Earth dictated which map to use. Okay, so let's say you found Hawaii and you wanted to map it out. And we're going to put a center point in that area. That's your home base. And we're going to put a circle in degrees, 360-degree circle on there. Now, we're going to start rowing out to each island, and as each degree you pass, you're going to start marking it, both longitude and latitude. Now, when you get done and you mapped all that out to all the islands, would that not be an accurate representation and size of the islands in respect to the center point? Of course it would be. The size and the location of the islands would be correct. It would be an accurate representation of reality on that map. So here's the latest update on the azimuthal equidistant map we've come to know as the Gleason map. Now, turns out the equidistant, well, that part we probably kind of knew, was the latitude lines are all equal distant from the center outward as far as it'll go. Well, it turns out and it makes sense, there'll be a point from the inside to the outside where one of those degree lines of longitude will be equal to the latitude. And it turns out that part is the equator, hence the name. So the equator is named that apparently because at that point it is equal distant to the latitude lines. That is why when I did the calculation on the speed of the sun, it all worked out because it's at the equator, and at the equator, 1 degree equals 60 nautical miles. So at that point, it makes sense both for latitude and for longitude. Each degree will be 60 nautical miles. Now, once you deviate from that, it all changes. But that's what they use to calculate the speed of the Earth, which really was the speed of the sun at the equator going over the flat Earth. So next we're going to be looking at the longitude and time portion of it here. And I found this book called Practical Arithmetic. Highly recommend you guys download this and read it. Very, very good. But there is a section in it, and this thing was published in 1873, and it was put in the New York Public Library in 1904. Let's see here. So let's read this. The equatorial circumference of the Earth is divided into 360 degrees, which are called degrees of longitude. The sun apparently goes around the Earth once in 24 hours. This time is called a day. Hence, the 24 hours, the sun apparently passes over 360 degrees of longitude. And in 1 hour, over 1/24 of 360 degrees is 15 degrees. Since the sun is passing over 15 degrees of longitude requires 1 hour or 60 minutes of time, in 1 minute of time, he will pass over 1/60th of 15 degrees. 15 degrees over 60 is 1/4 equals 15 minutes of longitude. So 1/4 degree equals 15 minutes of longitude. Right. Oop. Uh-oh. So 15 degrees of longitude require 1 hour of time. 15 minutes of longitude require 1 minute of time. And 15 seconds of longitude require, 15 15 seconds requires 1 second of time. So this is why they have the black and white lines, is between each parallel there's 15 degrees. So the black little square is 5 degrees, 10, 15, and the same for the outer ring as well. But as I stated before, this only matches up to the equator, not out here. Oops. So the 15 degrees marks on the outside ring here only apply when it's on the equator. So let's continue. Hence, we see that if the longitude expressed in degrees, minutes, and seconds is divided by 15 equals 3 times 5, the quotients will be hours, minutes, and seconds of time. If time expressed in hours, minutes, and seconds be multiplied by 15 equals 3 times 5, the product will be degrees, minutes, and seconds of longitude. When the sun is on the meridian of any place, it is 12 o'clock or noon at that place. Now, as the sun apparently goes from east to west, at the instant of noon, at one place, it will be past noon for all, let's go to the next page, all places at the east of it, and before noon for all places at the west. Hence, we find the difference of time between two places and know the exact time at one of them. The corresponding time of the other will be found by adding this difference to the given time, if the place be east, or by subtracting it if west. The meridian of the Observatory of Greenwich, London, is the one from which longitude is reckoned. That's right there. Let's zoom in on that.
None of them. Sounds crazy, but 99% of your internet comes from undersea, transatlantic, and trans-Pacific cables. Name one experiment to prove we're on a globe.
An experiment?
An experiment? A video? A picture? Something?
I believe Aristotle did an experiment where he measured...
Aristophanes.
Well, first of all, that's thousands of years ago. Today, it's 2017.
Well, you should be able to do the experiment again. Came up with the same result.
But
yeah, so his experiment was the stick experiment where he like put them in the ground in like very distant locations and then he measures the shadow angle.
Yeah.
However, if you bring the sun closer in, you get the same effect.
You're at the sled, everybody. NASA's stealing your money.
He might be deceiving us.
Research it.
And I think that's
Research it. You guys should think critically about subjects before you just
Who came up with this?
Your teachers show you one side of something.
I want to say 2015, Tequila and Bob BLB started talking about it on Twitter.
It's about 3 years.
Didn't Columbus already figure out that the Earth wasn't flat by crossing the ocean and then found another land?
Yeah.
You can actually circumnavigate the flat Earth as well.
So what does that mean?
So your teachers will tell you, right, when you're at the beach. Have you guys ever been to the beach, been in the water? You see a ship disappear over the horizon, right? They'll tell you that they're disappearing over the curve of the Earth. You pull out a camera like that, zoom it, boom, right back into focus. Yep. It's not going over the curve of the Earth, it's going out of your eyes perspective.
You can observe the curve of the Earth.
No, you can't. No, you can't.
We have on flat land.
By movies to view curvatures for content.
You don't see a curve from a plane, you don't see it from there. Just look into it. Mark Sargent,
look into it.
Oh, he's got the NASA hat on. Okay. Think NASA's telling you the truth? Research CGI, my friend.
Much of what our Earth turns into from a geometric level is based on the collective, meaning if the masses believe that Earth is X, then Earth becomes X. That's called a morphogenic field. It's actually when the consciousness of the species on the planet begin to determine the size and the shape of the planet. Now, when we go back into the ancient traditions, we'll find that, especially when you study some of the occultism and esoteric knowledge, that most of these societies that are putting forth the idea of a new world or a new world order are actually practicing a Babylonian tradition or a Sumerian tradition versus a Kemetan tradition. So it becomes very important for us to look at, in a sense, the Babylonian or Sumerian concepts of what the world is actually looking like, because that has been embedded into the consciousness of everyone. So that's actually the reality that most people are living in until they choose to rise off the plane that they're on. So a big part of this, though, that I wanted to mention is that the reason why flat Earth becomes so life-changing for many people is because it challenges the very construct in which you're walking on, the foundation. And once a person begins to be somewhat unsure about their foundation, then they gain the ability to begin to, how can I put it? They gain the ability to begin to restructure everything. And this is sometimes referred to as the destroyer. So now the foundation is destroyed. You don't believe even the Earth that you're standing on is the shape that they depict it as. And this is perfect for starting to unseat many of the concepts such as external gods and vaccinations and all those things. So we could see that the flat Earth theory has actually been rather instrumental to many people in their expansion. So there's no argument about that. The next step of this, however, is to go back into the ancient knowledge in order to realize what exactly is going on. Now, what you see to what I believe would be the left of your screen, which looks like a dome that's cut in half, and a pyramid, a ziggurat, rising from sea level all the way up 7 steps, okay? And then if you notice, there's an inverted pyramid below that, descending into the underworld, and that is actually referred to as the underworld. So according to Babylonian theology and spiritualism, which again, we're still living in now, that the world was divided into 7 planes. This is also why we have 7 days of the week, 7 primary planets or 6 primary planets, a moon, etc., because each of these planes actually represent a state of consciousness. These are the arcs or the archons that we're choosing to use to develop the most sentient life forms on the planet, or could be perceived as the sentient life forms on the planet. Because one of the major things that you read about in the Sumerian and Babylonian literature is that they're actually attempting to civilize and tame Earth. And in fact, it appears that there was a great conflict between the mother goddess and the Sumerian traditions, which are actually written in the Sumerian text, where Earth, as we know it, was actually disabled, and parts of that Earth were used as the bodies that we're standing on now. Now, again, you would need to go deep into your theism and occultism and your esoteric knowledge and your meditations in order to divine this type of information. But the next thing that you'll start to realize is that if it's true, you will have a blueprint, meaning you will have a correspondence to what is supposed to be true, because it will redundify everywhere in the status of as above, so below. So what you're looking at here also in the middle is the spectrum. This is what we would call the rainbow bridge. This is what we would call the races of people, or the different types of people in the world, including the animals. And as you see that there are concentric lines, just like the Isles of Atlantis, concentric lines that actually mark the barriers between one existence and another. The truth is that what creates the buffer between one realm and another is actually the marriages that take place between those two, in this case, colors. But you do have a clear demarcation between one dimension and another. And for anyone who's gone through a massive spiritual experience, you'll find that you kind of raise off of Earth, or the Earth plane. You lose this body per se, but you gain the use of another body that is also shrouded around you, that is made of a less denser form. And then you're able to go through other spaces. So that's actually what you're seeing all the way on the right, is a diagram that was put together about how those concentric circles determine the development of the spheres that are around your body, and which we call the aura. In addition to that, you can see that the Babylonian or Sumerian concept was still the same as the earth and the ocean being a reflection of the cosmos. You're seeing that in the picture off to the right, to where below there's actually the 7 isles of the Sumerians, which again gives us the 7 gods, 7 days of the week, etc. And then you're seeing the mirror or the reflection or the correspondence being mimicked in the heavens, which again gives us the term as above, so below, in the heavens, also on earth. But another thing that I want you to see here, because this is going to start to solidify more and more that this is in fact going on and this is in fact true, is that if you notice that the base pillar of this ziggurat, which is also known as the black pillar, corresponds to Saturn in the Sumerian tradition. And the interesting thing that was discovered about Saturn, and we'll come back to this image later, but that the poles actually are of a hexagonal nature, and that's over there on the right. And that hexagon, of course, gives us the cube. So what you then can divine, if you're following along, is that this base pillar is also known as the cube. And this cube is in many senses what the indigenous used to refer to when they would draw diagrams like this. This is, of course, the ancient Oriental depiction of Earth and the cosmos all as one, not as separate. And then another depiction of Oriental depiction of the Earth, again, as a square having 4 corners. And then again, we get here the Aztecs emulating the same 4 corners. And then even the most popular image of the flat earth theory, there being 4 corners. And this is somewhat of a metaphor that has been taken rather literal and needs to be blown up, because in a 2-dimensional aspect, the earth would then be flat. But in a 3-dimensional aspect, then it would be a cube. And that's what's referred to in societies as the square, and standing on the square. And also the 4 elements that are around the tips of the square are actually known as the 4 elements. And those elements were used in order to create the actual forces that you're seeing on the earth. So now images such as this, which is the Hindu mythological representation of the world, make more sense, because this tortoise, which actually, when you dig deep, they'll tell you is the female, is actually a correspondence to the parthenogenic mother goddess. The 4 elements, which would then be elephants, are then interpreted holding the bowl or the concave shaped earth. So now you can fully interpret that symbol. So the thing is that with ancient mythology, you actually need to have the experience and you need to have the scope of understanding in order to be able to interpret the symbols, or it seems quite fanciful that the earth could be on the back of a turtle. And it's just because our terminology that we use to explain things is very different than the ancients' terminology. Now, here's another image that I showed earlier that's also very important, because it gives you more of an idea of what actually exists in the realm slightly above us, even higher, and then how all those realms merge together. Because in the patterns or the orbits of the planetary systems, what you actually get is the tracing of the stars. And that's why the name of the mother goddess has also been known as a star. And the reason is because the orbits of these planetary systems actually begin to dictate the geometry that is placed within the chakras. So we go back here to this image again, and we begin to see that each step on this ziggurat in this particular Babylonian system does actually correspond to geometry. And how the Sumerians would put that is by numbers. Like Marduk was 50, there's 40, there's 30, there's 20. And these are to depict the levels of the chakra centers that are actually encrusted within inside of each realm. And now you'll see on Earth that we actually have, on the left, you see the phi, which is the left is the pattern that Venus traces out in the sky. Those are concave pentagrams, which are very different than straight line pentagrams when you understand geometry. But those concave pentagrams are actually what you witness in plant life, in phi, and in much of the mathematical encoding of the planetary system. And then you have 5 and 6 come together. So 6 is the base pillar. So when 5 and 6 come together, they make 11, which creates actually a dual plane. So what you're actually witnessing here is the terminology phi, which is also fighting. It's also conflict, because phi replicates itself based on conflict. And then you have 6, which is also sex, which is known to be what is taboo on the planet because it's the reproductive cycle. So when 5 and 6 get together, then there is a birth of what would be 11. So this is how the planetary systems, and we're just using soft numbers here, nothing's in stone, but this is how the planetary systems develop the life forms that live upon it and breed, crossbreed through marriages, the unique life forms that we see around us now. So this, of course, is archaic. It takes place over millions of years. And obviously the knowledge of this, as I spoke about yesterday, has already been uncovered by the Royal Societies and the Enlightenment era that took place over 180 years ago, in which the knowledge that was sequestered from that system, which of course a part of it was George Haeckel's radiolaria, was locked away from the populace and used now to control them. So what you see is literally what you see. Things coming from the sea or concepts from the mother, and then taken into the undivine masculine reality, and then shaped and formed and fashioned in another way, and then they come out as if they're the gods and the inventors of this, and that it belongs to them, etc., when that's not true at all. Now we want to get into another topic about why the spheric aspect of the world is even being used now, and it has a lot to do with this image. And many have seen this before. You will witness a circle around the sun or a circle around the moon, depending upon how the light is set up and depending upon the stage of the celestial body. And so this is why there was an idea, a concept that there was actually a round sphere around Earth, because it is true to a certain extent, but that sphere does not have much density to it. You actually have one of these spheres or toruses also around your body. So it's, again, another metaphor that is taken out of context, but there's a big difference between a sphere and a circle. Now remember, that's 2D versus 3D. So the 2D circle actually represents, as a symbol, a cycle or repetition. It's generally called the course, as there's courses in time. It also represents infinite rebirth and death. So that's why the circle symbolism is often used, because it harkens to an enclosure or a place that we're confined within, and then that there is a boundary. As you see on each of these systems, there's actually a boundary between each space, and those boundaries are not to be crossed according to the governors of the system. Now, these boundaries are also what we would say are the walls between the living and the afterlife, or in flat earth terminology, we would call it the ice wall. But this could easily be crossed when using another vehicle that can actually get you into those spatials. Now, what I want you again to pay attention to is the center ring, because there's a really concise concept that you can adapt in order to really understand what you're dealing with. And this is, in effect, a disk. And I see that I'm running out of time, so I'll go ahead and conclude here. The last thing is just to understand that if you accept someone else's concept of what your space is, then this is a diagram of the manifestation of artificial reality, also known as the atom cadmium, which is when you're fed ideas of what the reality is that you're on, and then those realities begin to embed and interact with inside of your consciousness, thus creating a new kind of temple that can be controlled by an external party.
Longitude is is estimated west 180 degrees and east 180 degrees from the prime meridian. Baltimore is longitude 76 degrees 37 minutes west, and New York is longitude 74 degrees 1 minute west. When it is 12 midnight at Baltimore, what is the time in New York? Well, the analysis comes out to the difference of longitude is 2 degrees 36 minutes and changed to time by dividing by 15. Gives 10 minutes 24 seconds. For the difference of time, and as New York is east of Baltimore, the time is later, and we would add. So 12 plus 10 plus 24 equals 12 midnight, 10 minutes 24 seconds. So 10 minutes 24 seconds after midnight is the difference in time by using that method. The longitude of New York, okay, so these are some more examples that you can work with down here. But this is the important part. Calculating the time. And this is something that Shills always threw in on my comments, and not just mine, but everybody else's on it. Oops. In order to calculate the time, the degrees and the points on the degrees must be correct. So, therefore, this map with the 360 degrees and the points on there is the actual location of that area. So, New York is right there. Baltimore's just below it, but that is where it is. The shapes of the continents and the shapes of the land masses are correct on an azimuthal equidistant map because they have to be in order for the time calculator to work. So in order for this calculator here to work, the land masses must be correct. See, this map is actually two things. One, it is an equidistant map. It has the longitude and degrees, and it's also a time calculator. That's where they have all this time on the outside and the degrees marked with the 15 degree intervals at the equator. But what that means is that it would be impossible for this map to work as a time calculator if the land masses did not match the coordinates and the degrees of the 360 degree circle. So, and I'm almost positive I can prove to you, especially when it comes to our friend over here, in I'm going to just call him from now on, no longer down under, but on the outer circle. I'm pretty sure I can prove that this landmass is correct, and this one is not. So stay with me here, and I'm going to explain to you how I came about that. But right now, based on all this information I've seen, there is no better map. That's why, as I stated in that video, that tutorial on how to do flat Earth maps, every map you see out there is a version of this. It's a I hate to use that word, the projection, but they hack this one into the rectangular picture, this one right here, and that's where we see all that. That's where it all comes from. So I looked at all sorts of ways to try to calculate the distance or the length of Australia. And I looked at the air routes like everybody else does. And I even had the idea to use Google Street View and start on one end of the country and look at the sign for the mileage and try to add them all up. That didn't last too long. That was tedious. But then I had the idea. I don't know why I never thought of this before, but I would like to introduce to you what could be the key to unlocking Australia, and that is the Indian Pacific Railroad. Now, the great thing about this line, this railroad, this is the southernmost railroad in the world. And it literally goes follows Australia on the southern side from Sydney all the way to Perth. And this is the map they give us on their website on there. But what's interesting is if you look at it on the flat Earth map, it's practically a straight line. So now let's look at some of the stats about this railroad. And this is right from their website. Average length of the train is 704 meters, 2 locomotives and 30 carriages. Now that's very important, 2 locomotives. Keep that in mind. Average weight of train, 1,400 tons. Length of track, 4,352 kilometers. The length of the journey, 65 hours, Sydney to Perth, and 4,352 kilometers. So there's no more track. 4,352 kilometers is all there is. There's no maintenance track. There's no other path. That's all they track, I guess. So, average speed of train, 85 kilometers per hour with a maximum of 115 kilometers. That equates to about 52 miles per hour for those of us living on the other side. The wedge-tailed eagle, Australia's largest bird of prey, I could really care less. Average number of carriages, 30 carriages, including guest carriages, crew quarters, restaurants, lounges, and power vans, whatever those are. So this data is key to unlocking the distance of Australia. Now, we're going to be looking at the Sydney to Perth route, which has the fewest amount of stops. It could go vice versa, but either one. It goes from Sydney to Adelaide to Perth. Now, I did a quick mapping on Google. I know, but just to see. And Google has a very different distance than the railroad did. And as you can see here, I added it all up. It comes out to 2,331 miles or 3,751 kilometers as the total distance for the train ride. So now let's see where it all comes out. So I started off by verifying the actual travel time and looking at their timetables. I was able to figure out the departure and arrival times for each location, and then you just add it up. So it came out to there's a total of 10 hours and 20 minutes of dead time being stopped and 61.74 hours of actual travel time from departure to arrival, and vice versa. So with that, we can then start calculating some variables. So they gave us the average speed of 85 kilometers per hour or 52.8 miles per hour. And that is for a passenger train. And I didn't put that down here, but anyone can look it up. For passenger train service, it's actually probably a little bit low. But in the United States, Amtrak has certain sections that can go up to 150 miles an hour. And they do it regularly. Apparently, the speed of the train is mostly dictated by the condition or grade of the track or classification of the track itself. So at any rate, the 52 miles per hour or 85 kilometers, perfectly acceptable, and as an average makes complete sense because there are sections of the train track that you'll be able to just go wide open throttle. There's nothing there. And trust me, I looked at the southern part of Australia, and with the exception of right outside of Sydney, with the mountain ranges there, everything else is fairly flat. And if you go to the website there for the Indian Pacific Railroad, they actually show you, I mean, it's flat. So I totally believe that is an actual number, and it makes sense to be for about 53 miles per hour or 85 kilometers. So I know that the distance traveled is 61.74 miles total. So all we have to do now is calculate the two. So for kilometers, 85 kilometers per hour times 61.74 hours gives you a total of 5,219 kilometers. In miles, it's 52.8 miles per hour times 61.74. That comes out to 3,260 miles. Okay. Now, for when we compare that against Google, there's a dramatic, and I mean dramatic difference in the distance of the two. So, and then for Indian Pacific, It's not quite as drastic, but it's still substantial. So for Google, we have a difference of 929 miles or 1,467 kilometers difference between the calculation of speed versus distance, or speed versus time, and what Google shows on their map. And for the Indian Pacific, that one, it comes out to 556 miles difference or 1,467 kilometers. Now, just to give you an example, 556 miles, that would be half of California on a north-south orientation. So it's a big chunk of land. Now, there are those that might claim, well, you know, the track, you have to have, you know, it takes, the track is longer because it's, you know, it has to wind, so the track is actually longer. Listen, there's 52 miles per hour is not only acceptable, but like I said, for a passenger and probably slightly on the lower side. But on the stats, the train only carries 2 engines. Now, if there was a lot of mountains, they would have 3 engines or more. Okay, as I said before, the majority of the land in the south is all flat. So the average speed and the time it took will tell you, regardless of what the track is, the distance they traveled, if the average speed of the train is correct. Now, if the track was truly all winding so much, then the average speed would be lower. Okay, so what I did is I decided to say, all right, well, I'll just calculate it at 10 miles per hour or less. So I put it at 68 kilometers. I recalculated all this, and at 42.8 miles per hour. Now, let me just say this. If you're going on a passenger train in an intercontinental type situation for 3-4 days, and the train's only averaging 42 miles per hour, hop in the car or on a plane. Seriously. Because it's not worth your time. But anyway, so when we do that, we still have a huge difference for Google of 311 miles or 446 kilometers. Now for Indian Pacific, it almost zeroed out. But again, at 42 miles per hour, that's freight train speeds on a good day. So that's impossible to have a freight train or a passenger train going across a continent that big, and they're only averaging 42 miles per hour. Get out and walk. It'll be faster. So as we look at the actual differences, we have a huge problem here for the globalists. They're going to have to answer this one big time, because Australia is bigger than what the map on the globe or the Mercator projection looks. It matches the flat Earth, the Gleason map. That's what that is. So if anyone can add to this, please add to the comments or contact me through the Google Mail. But I'm fairly confident at this point that Australia is much bigger than it looks on the globe map or the Mercator. And those of you in Australia, if you can hop on a train, take your wife on a birthday surprise or something for 3 days and put an app on your phone to measure the speed. What's your average speed? And if you can do that, it'll tell you what the actual distance is, because we have an opportunity right there, because the track is fixed. They can't change the route of the track. You have one train. You know when it begins, when it ends, at every stop. You can calculate the whole thing out. So I encourage brilliant friends out there, get out there and find out. Hop on that train.
That's one of the most beautiful things to do. Now remember this, Earth is flat.
See, listen, the
So
Earth
don't
isn't-
fall off this bitch.
We ain't gonna fall off, but don't worry. Thank you, man. You have a good day, brother.
Where the way land is flat. How could it not be flat?
How could it not be flat? How could we be a
Yeah, I talked about that earlier.
Yeah. So, hey, man, do yourself, just do me a favor. Ask some people to look into it. We want to try and get some people looking into it. So talk about it with some people. Converse with some people about it.
Yeah, I'll say look into it. I've seen this guy's shirt here. I don't know, not the space NASA words about it, Harvard NASA words, but land is flat, so why isn't the Earth flat?
Yeah. Just tell them to research flat Earth.
Land is flat, why isn't the Earth flat?
Thank you, brother. You have yourself a good day and be safe, all right?
You guys too.
Thank you.
If you did like this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you didn't like it, give it a thumbs down. If you haven't subscribed, hit the red subscribe button. Also click on the little bell icon to get notifications of my flat earth videos, which I upload every day.
And as always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.